My lovely subscriber, you finally returned to me after so much time when I have been lost and alone and longing for your warm embrace, for your touch, for you to touch me. We've been talking about a lot of things here on the podcast, on the YouTube channel, and all of them have to some extent been about overcoming life, dealing with the phenomena of life, and putting into order observations about life so that we may have a tangible framework of reality. Now, you might think to yourself, why is he doing this? I thought every word was a lie. I thought everything is power. This person must surely be quite nefarious, quite a dubious person to be undertaking this at all. And you're absolutely correct. This is my little ode to the ego. This is my little vanity ritual. Everyone must have one, okay? Everyone must have one. If you don't have a vanity ritual, then you're most likely A, very content with your life, B, extremely deluded about your life. You're living in a state of suffering, but you think you're experiencing happiness because the person who created you, who put their will inside of you, did such a good job at hiding their tracks, at smoothing over the surgical scars of the unseen surgery that they've conducted on you, that you really and honestly think that your inner voice is you, when it's actually, your mother, in most cases. And sometimes your father, depending on your background. And sometimes it's just that guy in school who you thought were your friend, but actually turns out was a psychopath. He was just a psychopath that didn't want to do any time for murder. So he just did very low-level social manipulation at all times. Even with the people he considered his best friends. So it's hard for the viewer to understand what to take from this. What was I saying? Yeah, so you're one or two. You're either very content or you're a puppet of another person, a Pinocchio, if you will. And oh look, smiling people. But if you're not one of those people, you most likely have a vanity ritual, okay? It's either singing along to your favorite song in the mirror, given yourself 10 minutes extra on the toilet to like just sit and do nothing. If you have a really, really busy day, I don't have a really busy day, so I can do nothing here out in the open. I don't have to isolate myself into a cupboard to do that. I know that's the reality of a lot of the people who view reproduction as the main task in life, and good luck to them. I hope every person who undertakes the arduous quest of reproduction manages to get through it without beginning to despise their child, because I think modern life is making it more and more difficult for people to not end up despising their children, either consciously or subconsciously. And that despise is in turn mirrored from the children onto the parents, which creates the familiar middle class dynamic of modern family life. So you gotta keep it light. And that's one thing that liberal people are very good at remembering. You gotta have some decadence to get through it all. You gotta have some self-indulgence in order to find joy. Alright, it's like those drag queens say, how are you gonna love anyone else if you can't even love yourself? And this is true on so many levels, because a person's world is shaped by the person, alright? You see everything through your nose. And that means that while we have linguistic constructions about the idea of caring for other people, helping other people, being concerned for other people, these linguistic constructions camouflage a very important fact, which is that this is, in principle, actually impossible to do. Like, it's not possible for you to enter another person's worldview. You can only collide. Okay, you can only bump into each other. You cannot enter. And so to say that you are helping someone, of course, that might be a clear way of stating something in a certain context, but it will always be based on an assumption. And that assumption can very often be wrong. That's one thing that, again, liberals are very good at pointing out. A lot of the time, concern is just camouflaged contempt, a type of elitist paternalism that builds itself on a contemptful view of others, but where the person has convinced themselves that pity is a more appropriate way of dealing with their contempt rather than rage. And it's not obvious that this is the case. Like, it's not obvious that pity is better than rage. And that's what we're finding out in Western Europe, in the cultural experiment. We're finding out that pity is actually the same thing as rage. And it does a lot of the same things. It just does them slower. Right? And why does it do them slower? Because we have so much goddamn time. Because for the first time in forever, the object of life is just to be alive for as long as possible. Now, this has never been the case in human history, because human is a spiritual being, and so it's always had a traditionally integrated relationship with its death, meaning that it was able to go into life knowing that it was going to die and still act and control its emotions. In hyper-technologized industrial society, this is no longer the case. Death is the thing that we must pretend is not there. It's the elephant in the room, if you will. And the entire technological progress, just as the transhumanist philosophers will concede, has been one giant escaping from death, one giant escape attempt. Okay, the prison of matter is an old idea, and that is precisely related to the fact that matter perishes, or it's subject to entropy, which means that we are restrained. We are restrained by gravity. We are restrained by the forces of nature. We are restrained by our lifespans. And so the transhumanist technological project has been essentially to try and escape the constraints of life without taking the path of death. And, basically what we're going to sit and be bored while watching in the 21st century is what that looks like in real life. Now, people who live in traditional society already knows what that's going to look like. It's going to look like a sort of mixture between a reality TV show and the movie Saw. And that is because it's the ultimate sacrilege. Okay, it's essentially what Sauron wishes to do in The Lord of the Rings. It's essentially the origin of the orcs, who are kind of produced in chemical pits in factories and dragged out of the mud. They're not born, they're just produced. It's the final end of the modern human, to be alienated from all things organic and to be seen just as functional flesh, factors of production. And that is very much what the orcs are in The Lord of the Rings, and that's why they're so ugly as well, and prone to things like cannibalism. Like, they have no principles because they know that they are just filth dragged out of mud pits. And that makes them a very formidable army for the forces of industry, which seeks to turn all of Middle-earth into Mordor, which is essentially just a giant burning wasteland. You could think of it as if you look at an oil refinery, that's essentially what Mordor represents. And the end state of the system, of the machine, is for all the world to become an oil refinery, and all human behavior to be predictable, so that the human being may be completely merged with the machine as just an energy input or a factor of production. Now, the reason why we have death is so that we can escape from life. But the reason we have death is the same reason why we have birth. Alright? If you think of it like this, there has to be a triggering event on the other side that causes a spiritual being to come into existence on this side. Now, if that event is akin to a sexual union, or if it's akin to a murder, we don't know, because we don't know what goes on the other side. Because if we did know, then we'd go insane. Okay, that's the function of forgetting. Okay, forgetfulness is the gods having mercy on you. If you could remember every dream you had, you would be incapacitated by schizophrenia at age 7. It would be impossible for your brain to maintain that level of perception. It's like running. It's like running a really advanced game on a really shitty computer. It just crashes. You know, if you don't have the graphics card, you don't have the graphics card. And so there's an event on the other side which brings you into existence on this side, your material state. And that means that the counter event to your birth is your death. That is how balance is maintained. And so that means that the other side is probably more analogous to the idea of a type of lobby, in which you cruise around in a sort of disembodied state, looking for things to materialize into. Alright, looking for things that turn you on. And then, once you materialize into the thing, you are put within a new game, which is limited by forgetfulness, and you are basically given the task of figuring out why you chose to materialize here to begin with, and then doing that thing, and then dying to find something else. Because if you don't do that, then everything stops. And nothing will ever stop, because we aren't cameras. We don't view life frame by frame. We view it in that mysterious, analogous way. We can intuitively perceive space, and there is always movement present. You know, unless you've been tossed in a modern torture dungeon, in a basement, under a government building or something. And of course, the fact that you can essentially brain damage a person to invalidity through sensory deprivation shows you how important being in the world is to a human as a composite of spirit and matter. But the transhumanist project is kind of trying to do this, but they don't want to die, you know. It's like, I want to be able to tell my friends that I jumped off the highest cliff at the beach, but I don't actually do it, you know. And so, hey, science, a great endless game that you can distract yourself with as you try not to think about the fact that you are here to die. And, you know, that's always going to be like jumping off the highest cliff. It's just a matter of, are you going to do it, or are you not going to do it? And if you don't do it, you're just a pussy bitch. Okay? If you show up with your friends to the cliff and you're the only one that doesn't jump, you're either not gonna get a girlfriend, or your girlfriend's gonna cheat on you with the guy who does a backflip. that simple, dickheads. Which is why so many scientific people are so resentful. You know, they haven't figured out why they materialized here, so they're not even past the first step, and they can't get past that because they're too weak. You know, like they're always looking for solid evidence, whatever that is. They're always looking for an object to validate their thing. They always need a measuring stick to feel anything. They cannot exist outside of a framework. They have to be in a framework at all times. And these are the people that do science and spend their whole careers sort of tinkering with data and making tiny inklings of progress, while more artistic people kind of put their stuff together to write sci-fi novels, which is essentially just a materialist type of mythology. Like, it's easier for Americans to digest the idea of aliens than it is to digest the idea of angels, just because they're obsessed with the future and technology instead of the soul and the mystery. But both of them are equally immaterial. Both of them are equally unreal, right? And so whether or not you prefer one or the other could really just be a matter of East and West. Impression versus expression. Imagination versus contemplation. Something like that. And so people who do science are fundamentally motivated by a resentfulness towards the world, and they desperately dig through their books to distract themselves from the anxiety that the time for them to discover their purpose is running out, and they're just sitting around playing with their little toy kits, with their little trains, just as they did when they were small kids. And so, yeah, it's something to think about when somebody wants to shove science in your face and talk to you about reality. Because what often characterizes this resentful person the most is an insistence that they know reality. Which comes from a place of panic-like fear that they might not know reality. And that's weakness. That's the essence of weakness. That's the essence of weakness. The essence of strength is to be indifferent to whether or not you know reality. Because you know that knowing, like all the other feelings, is precisely just that. Feeling. What does that mean? It means you don't have knowledge. Okay? You feel knowledge. You don't have understanding. Okay? Knowledge isn't a deck of Pokemon cards that you can collect and hoard. That's retarded. That's retarded. Okay? Because if you remember what Pokemon cards are, it's just some abstract crap that some people have cobbled together and put on a cardboard in order to sell it. Okay? It's novelty for the sake of novelty. It's nothing. Okay? It's nothing. Here's an image for you. Yeah, because we were on this long tangent about the sun. There's this movie from the Soviet Union from the 80s called, I know you, my fans love that fucking 80s because that's the last time when authenticity was still a thing. Like, the culture we live in today is essentially just a mixture of all the cultures that happened up until the 80s. Ever since then, we've just been postmodern. But anyways, maybe a part of the 90s as well. But yeah, there's a movie from the Soviet Union called Come and See, Иди смотри, which is about a little kid from Belarus who tragically has to join up with, well, not tragically, he's very enthusiastic about it. You know, because he's a young lad, all the other boys are going, and he doesn't want to be a pussy, alright? Now his mother is like, look, if you leave, you might as well just fucking kill us. Which is a pretty hardcore way to start off a movie. The screaming mother handing him an axe and telling him to chop them all down. Because if he leaves the farm, he might as well kill them all. And the kid is like 12 or 13 or something. He's a boy. He is the boy. And he joins up with the partisans, all right, with the guerrilla force that lives in the woods of Belarus. And the movie is extremely gritty because it shows the reality of, well, I don't know what life was actually like back then, but it shows in a very gritty way what it must have felt like to be in a partisan army. But it also shows the grittiness of the Nazis as they come into Belarusian villages and purge them, burn them, murder everyone inside, because this was how the Nazis carried out counterinsurgency warfare in Eastern Europe. It was a combination of standard counterinsurgency tactics, like people have been pillaging and burning the countryside to stop insurgencies since the Roman age. That's, for instance, how Gaul was subjugated. The pre-runner to modern day France. But also, the Nazis had this idea of, whatever, it doesn't even matter, these people aren't even human, And so, a very nonchalant cruelty, like we talked about when we were talking about Desaad. Now, in the scene where the Nazis come in to destroy a village, it's a very, very interesting scene which is worth looking at. You see at one point the drunken, laughing German soldiers going into a local kind of office and hauling out the local accountant, the local administrator, people with intellectual capital, the intelligentsia of that tiny little village. People who knew how to read and write and do mathematics and things. And, the soldiers, and it's a very interesting little moment. The soldiers are all laughing and smiling and sort of dancing as if it's all a musical act. That instead of tap dancing, they're just lighting buildings on fire and murdering people. But there's a great part of that scene where one of the soldiers takes a bag that this office worker guy is holding, and he pours out all the contents onto the floor, and then he laughs and he sticks his head in the bag and he goes, "Look, nothing." And then he's like, "Fucking intelligentsia," and then they push him off onto the barn where the Nazis later then burn everyone inside. So here you have a guy who spent a whole life being a gentle, decent person, becoming an intellectual. And then over the course of a few minutes, a guy arrives in a grey uniform, drags him out of his world, out of his house, takes his whole life, his bag with his pens and papers and whatnot, pours it onto the ground, and just theatrically, jokingly, and enragedly just lets him know that it's all nothing. And then, he is later killed with the rest of the villagers. And all the soldiers kind of laugh, like, yeah, that's the essence of intelligentsia. They can't get their head around nothing, so they spend a whole lifetime trying to describe nothing, and that's why their work is endless. Now, it's a great film. A great film with a lot of good moments of tables being turned and people getting what they earn. But it's full of death and suffering. Come and see. I Dies Maitre. What else was I going to cover? What else was I going to cover? I think that's it for now. I'll make another one if I can think of more. How about that? Huh? Yeah, let's leave it at that. Okay? Okay. Bye.